Hello and welcome. We live in a world that is constantly pulling for our attention, for our commitment, right? To our jobs, our goals, our families. But today we're going to explore something deeper. What does it mean to have a fully committed heart? And in a world that's just full of distractions, what does that actually ask of us? Let's dive into one powerful verse and see what we can find.
Just take a moment with this verse. Really let it sink in. The picture it paints is so active. A search across the entire earth. This isn't God just passively waiting around. It's a deliberate, focused seeking. And notice the purpose. This is really the core of the whole thing. The search isn't to find fault or to measure how perfect you are. The whole point is to strengthen. It's a search for a specific kind of heart, not to reward it, but to empower it. This idea is going to be the foundation for everything we talk about today.
So what's the core ethical duty this verse is getting at? Well, it's not about achieving some flawless moral record, which, let's be honest, is a relief for most of us. The duty is all about cultivation. That word is just perfect, isn't it? Cultivation isn't a one-and-done event, it's a process. It's kind of like tending a garden. You don't just show up and demand that it grow. You create the right conditions. You work the soil, you water it, you pull the weeds. So this duty is the ongoing work of making our hearts, our inner selves, ready, open, and available for something bigger than just our own plans.
To really get our heads around this, we're going to break it down into 4 parts. First, we'll explore what this search for a heart is really all about. Then, we're going to look at 2 key practices. First, learning to care about what truly matters. And second, and this might be a surprise, learning what to be indifferent to. Then, we'll wrap it all up with a guided reflection to help make these ideas personal for you.
All right, let's jump into this first section. When you hear about a divine search, it's pretty easy to assume the bar must be impossibly high, that only spiritual superheroes need to apply. But the text actually points us in a very different and frankly a much more accessible direction.
This slide shows a really powerful distinction, I think. On one side, you have what our culture, and often we ourselves, think is required. You've got to have exceptional talent, boundless energy, a genius-level intellect. But the verse just flips that script entirely. The crucial quality isn't your ability, but your availability. And it's worth asking, why do we get that so wrong? I think it's because we live in a world that's all about what you can do, what you can achieve. We're trained to think our value comes from our performance. The idea that simple willingness, just making yourself available, could be more valuable than raw talent is completely countercultural. A committed heart is, at its core, an available heart. It's way less about your resume and so much more about your readiness. Okay, so that leads us straight into our first practice. If we want to cultivate an available heart, where on earth do we even begin? Well, the starting point is getting our hearts in sync with what Jesus shows us is most important. It's about learning to care about the same things he cares about, which is a fundamental reordering of our priorities and our passions. And really, this boils down to 2 primary areas of focus. First, this huge, universal care for the entire world, all people, no exceptions. And second, a really specific, intimate care for the community of faith, the church. And these 2 really are a package deal. You can't just pick one. A love for the world without a commitment to a specific community can get kind of abstract and maybe a little ineffective. But a love for the church that doesn't spill over into a love for the world can become cliquey and inward-looking. So let's look at each of these a little closer.
This verse from Matthew just paints the picture so well, doesn't it? Notice the motivation here. It's compassion. He doesn't see the crowds as a hassle or a problem to solve. He sees their vulnerability, harassed and helpless. And his response is this deep, empathetic care. And that compassion has to go out to everyone. And yeah, that includes people we profoundly disagree with, people we find difficult, and even people we might think of as our opponents. It's a compassion that isn't based on whether someone else is worthy or agreeable, but on their basic humanity.
And this is where the rubber really meets the road, right? It's one thing to agree with this in principle, but it's a whole other thing to actually apply it. So think about this. Sometime in the coming week, you're almost guaranteed to interact with someone whose views, political, social, whatever, you find just wrong. Our default is to argue, right? Or dismiss them, or just avoid them. But how does this call to see them with compassion, as someone who is maybe harassed and helpless in their own way? How does that challenge your response? Does it change how you talk to them, how you listen, or even just how you think about them when you're alone?
Now for that second point of care, the church. And wow, the language here in Ephesians is about as powerful as it gets. This isn't just a casual fondness. It's a sacrificial, life-giving love. The verse connects this love directly to the cross, as if to say, this is how much I'm committed. And let's be real, this can be a tough one. It's easy to love the idea of the church, But loving the actual real-life community of flawed, messy people, that's a much bigger challenge. But this verse shows us that this is a core value. Caring for the church means investing in the health and the unity and the mission of that specific, imperfect community we're a part of.
All right, so now we get to our second practice, and this one, it might sound a little weird at first. Cultivating indifference. Now, this isn't a call to be apathetic or to not care about anything. It's more of a strategic indifference. It's about consciously deciding where not to invest our limited emotional and spiritual energy. Our hearts only have so much capacity for deep concern. This practice is all about making sure that capacity is being spent on things that last forever, not on things that are just temporary.
Just look at this contrast here. It makes things so clear. On one side, we've got the things that so easily eat up our attention. Worrying about our personal safety, being rigid about traditions, the never-ending cycle of politics, and the chase for more money. And let's not forget that one, opinions of others. I mean, in the age of social media, that might just be the biggest one of all. The text suggests that Jesus was indifferent to these things when they got in the way of his mission. His focus, on the other side, was locked on the eternal, the mission of God's kingdom and living in a way that had God's approval. It's not that these temporary things don't matter at all, but they lose their power over us when we put them in their proper secondary place.
This verse is pretty much the master key for this whole practice. It's a call to recenter our focus, and it comes with this incredible promise. If we put what's eternal first, the temporary worries that cause us so much stress will fall into place. It's a huge invitation to trust, isn't it? It's basically saying, you focus on my stuff and I'll handle your stuff. That requires letting go of our need to control everything, which is both terrifying and incredibly freeing. It's the belief that when we focus on the right things, the necessary things will follow.
Okay, so we've talked about the big ideas: availability, caring, and this idea of indifference. Now, let's bring it all home. Let's make it personal. The next few moments are just an invitation for you to reflect on how these concepts might actually take shape in your own life. I'll pose a few questions to help guide your thoughts. First, let's think about the nature of our faith. There's this warning against a faith that just becomes passive, one that just takes in information and experiences but never actually translates them into action, one that just sits, soaks, and sours. Jesus was always calling people to action. Come, follow, go, do. So where in your life has your faith maybe become a little stagnant? And remember, active faith doesn't always mean being super busy for God. It can be quiet things, acts of service, intentional prayer, or just choosing kindness in a really difficult moment. What would an active faith look like for you right now in your situation?
Now, let's go back to that first practice of caring. We know Jesus cares deeply for the world and for the church, so let's get specific. What's one tangible thing you can do this week? And it doesn't have to be this huge, grand gesture. It could be praying for a specific global crisis you saw in the news, reaching out to a difficult neighbor, or just sending an encouraging text to someone in your faith community. What is one thing you will choose to care more about, simply because you know He does?
And finally, let's think about that second practice, strategic indifference. Just take a second and do a quick scan of your own mind, your own heart. What worry, what ambition, what opinion of other people is just taking up way too much space in your head? What temporary concern is distracting you from what's eternal? This takes some real honesty, but you got to be gentle with yourself too. We all get caught up in this stuff. The question is just about recognizing it. What might it feel like to consciously loosen your grip on that concern, even just for today?
And that brings us to this final, really clarifying choice. The week ahead of you is going to be full of countless moments to invest your heart, your attention, your energy, your passion. And the principles we've explored today really boil it all down to this one fundamental decision. Will you invest your heart in a temporary concern that you can release or an internal value that you can embrace? The choice is yours.